They say a person only dies once. They're wrong. I died in the middle of a crowded airport under fluorescent lights that hummed like insects, with strangers brushing past me as if I were already invisible. I died the moment my husband walked away with my passport, my money, and the last remaining pieces of the life I thought we shared. But the world didn't pause for my death. No one screamed. No one noticed. Only silence marked the moment the woman I had been trusting, gentle blind, collapsed inside me like a burned-out star. The security officers who surrounded me thought I was a lost traveler. The people who stared thought I was confused. But I knew better. I knew a murder had just taken place. Not of my body, but of the life I'd built, the identity I carried, the name I believed was mine. And the man who killed that version of me didn't need a weapon. He only needed my trust. What he didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that some deaths don't end a life. Some deaths ignite one. Because when I finally looked up from that cold airport bench, tears drying against my skin, my heart beat slow and steady, like a drum signaling war, I realized something with brutal clarity. He hadn't buried me. He'd unleashed me. And when a woman rises from her own ashes, she doesn't rise soft. She rises sharp. She rises silent. She rises ready to ruin the man who mistook her breaking for her end. This is not the story of how I lost everything. This is the story of how I became someone capable of taking it all back, and how in the end it was he who never saw the final blow coming. I used to believe that danger announced itself with thunder loud, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. But the truth is far crueler. Sometimes danger whispers. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it buys you a dream vacation. The morning it all began, the sun over Manhattan looked like something painted. Just for me, warm gold spilling across the penthouse windows, soft enough to make even the city seem gentle. David had woken me with breakfast on a tray, the scent of rosemary eggs drifting through the room. His favorite cologne cedar and smoke still lingered in the sheets. "Liz," he whispered against my ear, "I have something for you." I turned half asleep, half delighted. David loved surprises. I loved believing him. He pulled out an envelope, a simple white one, the kind that held birthday cards or love notes. He placed it in my hands as if it were fragile. Inside were 2 first-class tickets from JFK to Los Angeles, a week in Santa Monica, oceanfront suite, private driver, spa reservations, sunset cruises, everything I'd talked about for years but never dared to plan. "David," I breathed. "Why now?" "Because you deserve it." His eyes crinkled the way they always did when he wanted me to trust him. "Because you've worked so hard. Because I want us to reset. You know, reconnect. Reconnect." That word made my heart swell. We'd been drifting. I felt it. Long nights at his office calls he took, in another room his sudden bursts of irritability. I told myself he was stressed, that every marriage had seasons. I told myself lies because they felt safer than the truth. And yet that morning, with sunlight softening the edges of everything, I let myself believe him again. I let myself hope. I threw my arms around his neck. "Thank you," I whispered. "I needed this. We needed this." His embrace tightened, but only for a second, long enough for me to miss the warning in the stiffness of his shoulders. long enough to miss the way he exhaled, not in relief, but in calculation. I didn't see the wolf behind the smile, not yet. The next days blurred into preparation. David insisted on handling everything: flights, hotel, transportation. "Relax," he told me. "Just pack your dresses. Let me take care of the boring details." He had always managed our finances ever since my father's death 4 years earlier. Dad trusted him, and so did I. Why wouldn't I? David was the charming, brilliant MIT graduate husband everyone envied. I never asked why he needed my signature on a small stack of documents 2 days before the trip. "Travel insurance forms," he said. "Bank authorization while we're away," he added casually. "You know how banks freeze things when you're out of state. It's just easier if I can step in if something pops up." He said it as though it were nothing, as though he weren't handing me the pen like a dagger I'd unknowingly plunge into my own life. I signed everything, without reading, without hesitating. It shames me now remembering how I smiled afterward, telling him, "You always think of everything." He kissed my forehead. "Yes," he murmured, "I do." The morning of our departure felt like the start of a fairy tale. I wore my favorite navy wrap dress, the one David always said made me look effortlessly expensive. He wheeled our suitcases through JFK like a man who had every detail under control. His arm brushed mine as we navigated the crowd, and I leaned into him, believing, truly believing, we were about to reconnect. That belief died slowly, one small cut at a time. The first cut came at security. "Hand me your wallet, babe," he said, reaching for my crossbody bag. "It's chaotic here. Let me put it in my backpack so you don't lose anything." ID cards, phone, put them all inside. I'll keep everything together. It sounded reasonable. It always sounded reasonable with him. I gave him everything. When he zipped the backpack shut, it was with a subtle, satisfied motion, as though he were sealing a coffin. The second cut came at the baggage claim in LAX. Our suitcases slid onto the conveyor belt, gleaming under fluorescent lights. The air smelled like coffee and jet fuel, and travelers hurried around us, their laughter bouncing against the terminal's high ceiling. I felt alive, excited, safe. David set the suitcases on a cart and said lightly, "I'm gonna grab us a local sim, and I've gotta hit the restroom. Stay here, okay? I'll be back in 2 minutes." I smiled. "Want me to come?" "No." His voice sharpened, not enough to alarm me, but enough to silence me. "Just wait here. I'll handle it. Don't move." He squeezed my shoulder, too tight. I mistook it for affection. The third cut was the time, 5 minutes. I checked the arrivals board. 10 minutes. My hands began to fidget. 15 minutes. My stomach tightened. 30 minutes. The crowd thinned. The laughter faded. 45 minutes. Something inside me went still. 1 hour, and I understood. Something was wrong, deeply, terrifyingly wrong. I scanned the terminal, desperate for his face. Instead, an airport security officer approached me. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need assistance?" My voice cracked. My husband. He took my ID. My phone. Everything. He said he'd be back. He hasn't. They exchanged glances. "Do you have any form of identification on you?" I shook my head. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us." My legs trembled as I followed them, my mind racing through excuses. Maybe he was delayed. Maybe he'd gotten lost, maybe. But as we passed a wide glass window overlooking the departure corridor, I saw him, David, walking swiftly, not toward me, but away. And next to him, Rachel. I froze. The elegant woman I'd met once at a company dinner. Someone he said was practically family. She rolled a carry-on suitcase. He carried nothing except the backpack, holding my entire identity. Their hands brushed. They laughed. They didn't look rushed. They didn't look worried. They looked like lovers on a getaway. A flush of icy numbness crawled up my spine. I pounded on the glass. David. He didn't turn. Not once. The officers gently but firmly guided me away. My breath hitched, my vision blurred, and in the sterile TSA office, surrounded by humming equipment and blank walls, I realized the truth. I wasn't forgotten. I was discarded, and worse, I was erased. David hadn't lost me. He had abandoned me, stripped me of my identity, and left me stranded with no money, no ID, no phone because he needed me, gone. The documents I signed, the urgency in his preparations, the smiles that felt just a little too polished. I hadn't been invited on a trip. I had been escorted into a trap. Shock hollowed me out. My hands trembled so violently I had to sit down. My throat felt bruised from the scream I hadn't released. Only one thought pulsed through me, quiet but sharp. He planned this. He planned all of it. The officers asked questions. Where was I staying? Did I know his phone number by heart? Did I have anyone to call? I had nothing. No hotel reservation, no wallet, no phone, no emergency contact memorized, except one number I had known since childhood. My father's lawyer, Mr. Reynolds. I clung to that number like a lifeline. In a borrowed office, using a landline phone older than the airport itself, I dialed with shaking fingers. He picked up after one ring. Reynolds speaking. The moment I heard his voice, my chest crumbled. Mr. Reynolds, I whispered. It's me. It's Elizabeth. Something terrible has happened. There was a pause, a sharp inhale, then a voice of steel. Tell me everything, right now. And I did, every word tasting like poison. When I finished, he didn't speak for 5 seconds. Then Elizabeth, you need to listen carefully. You are not safe, and you are not wrong. If David has your ID and your signatures, this is bigger than abandonment. A rustle of papers, a clipped urgent tone. He's trying to wipe you out, financially, legally, completely. I'm mobilizing my team. Don't move. Don't speak to anyone else. We're going to fight back. My breath shuddered. But how I have nothing. You have me, he said. And you have the advantage. He didn't expect you survived the trap. I closed my eyes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Something hot and fierce started burning in the hollow where my heart had broken. Something like anger. Something like resolve. Something I didn't recognize yet but would soon. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, if you've ever loved someone who used your love against you, if you've ever stood in the ruins of everything you thought was safe, then stay with me, because what happened next wasn't survival, it was war. And I didn't just rise from what he tried to do to me. I came back for him. Mr. Reynolds' voice still echoed in my ears, long after the line went dead. The TSA room hummed with low fluorescent noise, the kind that made thoughts scatter, but mine sharpened instead. clenching, crystallizing, snapping into painful clarity. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't waiting for explanations. I knew exactly what had happened. David hadn't abandoned me because of a fight. He hadn't panicked or acted on impulse. He had engineered every detail of my disappearance. And the documents I'd signed those pages I hadn't read because I believed in him were the lock on the cage he planned to close around me. A TSA supervisor stepped into the room, his posture firm but cautious as if I were something fragile he didn't want to break further. "Ma'am, we've contacted Airport Assistance Services," he said. "Someone will help you get temporary access to communication so you can coordinate with your legal counsel." I nodded numbly. Words felt unreal. I was floating in a version of my life that wasn't mine anymore. One of the officers escorted me through a restricted hallway into a quieter administrative wing. My body moved automatically, but my mind stayed trapped in the moment I'd pounded on the glass window, screaming for a man who didn't turn around. The memory kept flickering like a broken film reel. Eventually, he brought me to a small conference room, a temporary shelter in a place not meant for the stranded and the betrayed. "Do you need water food?" he asked. I shook my head and sat down. The walls were dull beige, the table scratched from years of paperwork and forgotten coffee mugs. A phone sat at the center. Nearby was a small charging dock and a laptop someone kindly placed there in case. In case. As though losing your entire life at an airport was something with a protocol. I rested my palms on the table, grounding myself. Mr. Reynolds had said something crucial. "You were not wrong. If David has your ID and your signatures, this is bigger than abandonment." The truth was starting to show its edges, and those edges were razor sharp. A soft knock sounded at the door. A young airport staffer entered, a woman with steady eyes and a badge that identified her as Clara. She set down a folder. "We found these in the lost and found inbox," she said gently. "These may help you understand what your husband did. It appears he dropped them outside during security." My breath hitched. The documents, the ones I had signed 2 days earlier, they sat inside the folder, innocent and monstrous at the same time. Clara hesitated, her voice low. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. If you need to talk to someone, or if you want me to stay." "Thank you," I whispered, "but I think I need to read these alone." She nodded and slipped out. I waited 5 seconds after the door clicked shut before I opened the folder. The first document was labeled Temporary Financial Authorization, but the text beneath it had nothing temporary about it. It was a blanket power of attorney. Full control, not partial, not conditional, immediate. Every asset, every property, every account attached to my family trust. My heart pounded so hard, the paper shook in my hands. Why would David need this for a week-long trip to California? The next document was worse, a notarized emergency delegation of ownership rights, stamped, sealed. My signature sat at the bottom, elegant, flawless, damning. I reached the 3rd page. A line near the middle froze my lungs. "In the event of prolonged absence, the grantee shall assume full authority over estate management, including liquidation." Liquidation, prolonged absence. My disappearance wasn't a side effect. It was the requirement. David had built a legal coffin, and I had signed the lid shut myself. I didn't cry, not then. Shock had its own kind of anesthesia, and rage, quiet, icy, lethal, was beginning to take its place inside me. My phone was gone, but the laptop on the table had internet access. I opened a blank search bar and typed the only thing that mattered, now California property, transfer fraud emergency protocol. Dozens of results flashed. Laws, regulations, case studies. A pattern emerged. If David intended to transfer property or move assets under forged authority, he needed to act fast before anyone challenged the legitimacy. I closed the laptop and leaned back. Every puzzle piece was falling into place. He wasn't just leaving me behind, he was replacing me. Replacing me on paper, replacing me in our home, replacing me in his life with the woman I saw at the airport, Rachel. Her name formed like a sour taste on my tongue. The memory of her smile, polished, calculated, hit me like a second betrayal. She hadn't just known, she had been part of it. My chest tightened. I forced myself to breathe slowly, steadily. I couldn't afford panic. Not now, not when I understood how little time I had. I opened the laptop again and logged into one of my email accounts, using the only password I knew by heart. The screen loaded with a flood of unread messages, notifications, alerts, bank communications. I clicked the most recent. My blood went cold. Suspicious transfer flagged, pending review. It was from my primary bank. Fraud detection had frozen a request by David to access an account tied to my inheritance. Another message, another transfer request, another, dozens. He'd been trying for hours, while I was trapped in a TSA office, while he was strolling through LAX with another woman. While I was dissolving in shock, he had been emptying my life into his pockets. A heavy breath clawed its way out of my lungs. But then another message. Communication from Attorney Reynolds, temporary freeze implemented. Mr. Reynolds had moved faster than David anticipated. That gave me a sliver of time, a sliver big enough to fight through. Before I could read further, the conference room door opened again. This time an older man in a charcoal blazer stepped in. He carried authority, the way some people carry weapons, naturally, effortlessly, dangerously. Elizabeth. His voice was steady. I'm Attorney Hernandez. Mr. Reynolds contacted me. He asked me to get to you immediately. Relief nearly buckled my knees. He sat opposite me, opened his laptop, and pulled up several files. I've reviewed the documents you were tricked into signing. They're sophisticated fakes designed to mimic emergency delegation forms used for medical crises. But the signature's real. That complicates things. I swallowed hard, so he can still use them. For the moment, yes, but we can challenge their legitimacy. The key is proving you were unaware of their true content. He leaned in. The fact you were abandoned without ID, stranded, and unable to communicate, that creates a strong case for coercion and fraud. I met his eyes. Can he take my house? The trust, the accounts. Not if we outrun him, Hernandez said. Mr. Reynolds has already pushed a freeze order. We need to reinforce it with federal involvement. A bitter laugh escaped me. Federal? Because my own husband tried to erase me. Hernandez didn't smile. He understood there was no humor here. He tapped a few keys. Right now, David is in California. If he attempts to finalize any transfer or sale, he'll need to verify his authority in person. That gives us a window to intercept. How big is the window? I asked. Hours, maybe less. Fraudsters act fast. Fraudsters. The word felt surreal. David wasn't just a liar, not just a cheater. He was a criminal, a man capable of weaponizing marriage vows, of weaponizing trust, of weaponizing love itself. I pressed my fingers against my temples. I could feel my pulse there, thick pounding, alive with fury. Hernandez continued, his tone sharper. Mr. Reynolds is assembling a forensic team. You'll need to return to New York as soon as possible. I've already contacted LAX federal liaison officers. They're preparing emergency travel documentation for you. I exhaled shakily. How soon can I fly back? If all goes well tonight, my stomach clenched. David will check the accounts. He'll see the freeze. Yes, Hernandez said, and he'll panic. I imagined David in a luxury hotel suite with Rachel sipping champagne on my credit card, laughing at the ease of it all. I imagined the moment his transaction failed, the way his jaw would clench, the way his mask would slip. He'd know then that I wasn't gone, that I wasn't erased, that I was still alive inside the cage he built and clawing at the bars. When he panics, Hernandez added quietly, he'll make mistakes. That's when we catch him. I nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for identity, for dignity, for the right to exist in my own life. Hours passed as paperwork moved, calls were made, and legal gears began turning. It felt like watching a machine awaken, slow at first, then roaring to life. Throughout it all, I remained silent, focused. The shock had drained away. So had the trembling. What filled me now was something cold, not fear, not grief, purpose. When the federal liaison returned with a temporary travel packet and instructions to head to the emergency transport gate, I stood from the table without hesitation. As Hernandez gathered his things, he paused and looked at me carefully. Elizabeth, I need to ask, how are you holding up? For a moment, I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. How was I broken, angry, hollow, awake, all at once? But I didn't say any of that. I simply looked him in the eye and replied, I'm done being the victim. Something flickered in his expression, respect maybe, approval. Then he nodded and stepped aside so I could walk through the door. I left the beige-walled room behind. Left the broken pieces of the life I'd known there on the table. Ahead of me stretched the airport corridor, bright, sterile, unfamiliar. Each step I took felt heavier, but also stronger. I was walking toward a new battlefield, one David had never expected me to reach. And I was ready. The hours between LAX and New York no longer belonged to time. They belonged to something colder, sharper, something stripped of illusion. I boarded the emergency transport flight with nothing but an envelope containing my temporary documents and the clothes I had been abandoned in. No wallet, no phone, no trace of the life David tried to erase. The seatbelt clicked around my waist with a hollow sound that echoed like a verdict. Outside the small oval window, the runway lights blurred into streaks as the plane gathered speed. For a moment, everything went quiet inside me. Quiet the way a held breath is quiet before a scream. When the plane lifted off, it felt as if the world and they dropped away beneath me. I wasn't ascending, I was escaping, running, re-emerging. the cabin lights dimmed, leaving only soft shadows and the faint hum of engines, a mechanical lullaby meant to soothe. But nothing soothed me. My mind refused to settle. It churned with the images I kept trying to push away. David's laugh beside Rachel's, my wallet disappearing into his backpack. The papers I signed, the security officer's pitying eyes. And beneath it all, something deeper. The realization that a part of me had died inside that airport office. Not a violent death, not a loud one, but a quiet extinguishing of the woman who believed that love made you safe. I stared at the tray table in front of me, at the cracks in the plastic, the fingerprints left behind by strangers. Each detail anchored me in the present, away from the chaos replaying behind my eyelids. Still, the memories forced their way in. The moment he turned his back at LAX, everything else turned false. Every date, every whispered promise, every gesture of tenderness. It was all rehearsed, practiced, weaponized, a manipulation executed with the precision of someone who had planned my absence down to the second. As the plane reached its cruising altitude, I folded my arms tightly, trying to stop the shaking that had nothing to do with turbulence. My thoughts drifted toward the financial cage David had spent months constructing around my life. Every signature I'd given him, every access code, every trusting moment. He'd studied me the way predators study prey, not out of love but efficiency. Somewhere above the Rockies, the cabin lights flickered to full brightness as the flight attendant rolled her cart down the aisle. "Water?" she asked gently. I took the bottle, but my hands remained cold, unmoving. I realized I wasn't thirsty. I was bracing. The truth was dawning slowly, relentlessly. I was returning home not to reclaim my life, but to find out how much of it was left. The engines droned on steady and impersonal, while midnight unraveled across the sky. People slept around me. I couldn't. My pulse felt like a hammer inside my veins. Not fear, anticipation, a dreadful knowing that when we landed, I would step into a battlefield built from marble floors, bank ledgers, legal traps, and the echoes of betrayal. Hours later, the cabin dipped into its descent toward JFK. I watched the city lights gather beneath us, a sprawling, glittering network that looked nothing like home. I used to see possibility in those lights. Now they looked like interrogation lamps. The moment my feet touched the ground, a kind of electricity ran through me. I wasn't sure if it was adrenaline or something darker, resolve, sharpened by humiliation. The agent who met me at the gate held a sign with my name on it. "Ms. Hale," he confirmed. My name, still mine, for now. "Yes," I replied. He led me briskly through back corridors and unmarked doors, bypassing crowds and automated announcements. I moved silently beside him, absorbing every detail, every sound, every turn. It felt like a corridor, leading me back into the life David thought he had stolen. When we reached the private exit, a black sedan was waiting. The back door opened, and a familiar figure stepped out. Mr. Reynolds. His expression was grave, controlled, almost surgical. "Elizabeth," he said. "Good, we're on schedule." I got into the car without asking what schedule he meant. I didn't need to know. I trusted him in a way I had never trusted David, not because he offered comfort, but because he offered clarity. As the car pulled away from the terminal, New York's night pressed against the windows. Streetlights streaked past like fragments of the world I had once lived in. I studied them with a strange feeling like I was looking at a place I used to inhabit but could no longer claim. Mr. Reynolds opened a file on his lap. "You should hear what we've discovered," he said quietly. "It's extensive." I steadied myself. "Tell me." For the last 6 months, David has been in contact with multiple private lenders. He borrowed heavily recklessly and used the illusion of your wealth as leverage. He promised them collateral in the form of your trust assets. A cold wave washed over me. He said he could guarantee repayment. Reynolds continued as long as certain documents cleared. "Documents I signed," I murmured. He nodded. He needed one thing to make the foundation solid: your absence. A legal vacuum in which he could argue that he held temporary authority. The car turned down Fifth Avenue. My reflection in the window stared back at me, a stranger with hollow eyes and clenched fists. "He didn't just want access," Reynolds added. "He wanted permanence." The moment he confirmed your disappearance at LAX, once he filed a report claiming you were lost, he intended to act on every transfer at once. Claiming I was lost, I repeated slowly, tasting the words, as if I were a misplaced suitcase. Reynolds closed the file. "You were not meant to reappear." The city blurred around us, the sound of tires against asphalt merging into the growing roar in my ears. "He filed a missing person report?" I asked. "Not yet, but we intercepted communications indicating that he planned to. Most likely tomorrow morning." "That's why we needed you back tonight." "Why tomorrow?" "Because that would give him the leverage to argue urgency. And once transfers began, undoing them would be complicated." Complicated, a polite word for irreversible. The car turned onto my street. My townhouse rose ahead, tall and pristine, its windows glowing faintly against the night sky. A facade of peace, of stability, a place David expected to walk into as the owner. But he had forgotten one thing, a very important thing. You cannot own a home built from someone else's bones, not when they rise again. We parked in the private garage. The air was cold, humbling in its quiet. Mr. Reynolds led me through the back entrance. I stepped into the hallway, and the scent hit me: lavender and cedar, the combination I used in my diffusers. A smell that once made me feel comfort. Now it felt foreign, distant, almost mocking. I walked through my own home as though I were trespassing. Every painting, every vase, every polished surface, things I had chosen, things I had treasured, now felt contaminated by David's intentions, poisoned by the knowledge that he had planned to strip them from me piece by piece until nothing remained. We entered the study. 2 men sat at the long table, a forensic accountant, with glasses perched low on his nose, and a federal agent with a stern jawline and eyes that scanned everything at once. The agent stood. "Ms. Hale, I'm Special Agent Miller." I shook his hand, my grip firmer than I expected. I wasn't fragile anymore. Or maybe I was, but fragility had sharpened into something dangerous. Agent Miller motioned to a large display screen. "We've mapped out David's movements since your departure," he said. He and Rachel checked into a beachfront hotel in Santa Monica 2 hours after leaving LAX. I stared at the screen. There he was, walking across polished marble floors, smiling as the concierge handed him a key card. He attempted 3 major transfers using the forged files the forensic analyst added. All declined because your attorney froze the accounts just in time. His next move, I asked. We expect him to try again in person tomorrow, Miller said. He'll attempt to access physical documents here. The original deed trust statements, any personal seals. That's why we've secured the property. And that's why you must be here when he arrives. The room went still around me. A single breath seemed to stretch forever. I understand, I said quietly. But understanding wasn't the right word. I didn't merely understand. I felt something solidify inside me, something like armor. A woman who has been erased does not come back gentle. The agent continued, he will walk into this house believing everything is still in his control. We need him to speak freely to incriminate himself. You will allow him to talk, to reveal the details of his plan. Every word will be recorded. A slow exhale escaped me. I pictured him stepping inside, carrying his suitcase, expecting silence. Expecting my absence, expecting victory. He wouldn't find any of that. He'd find me, ready, awake, unrecognizable. Agent Miller studied my face. Can you handle that, Ms. Hale? I met his gaze without blinking. Yes, I said, because the truth was simple. David had taken everything from me, except the part he should have feared most. He hadn't taken my will. That was the mistake he would pay for. Morning didn't arrive softly. It crashed into the townhouse like a verdict, seeping through the tall windows in pale streaks that made the marble floors look colder than ever. I had barely slept an hour at most, but exhaustion had lost its meaning somewhere between the airport and the moment I stepped back into my home. My body felt weightless, wired silent in a way that wasn't peace but preparation. Mr. Reynolds's team had been working through the night. The study had transformed into a war room, screens lit documents spread across the table in surgical order. Quiet murmurs traded with the precision of professionals who understood exactly what was at stake. I sat on the edge of the chaise in the living room, listening to the faint clicks of keyboards from the next room. Each sound was a reminder that somewhere in California, David believed everything still belonged to him. But the house felt different now. Not mine yet, not fully, but no longer his. An in-between space. A battleground waiting for footsteps. Agent Miller entered the room, a tablet in his hand. His movements were spare, deliberate. Ms. Hale, he said, lowering his voice out of instinct. We have an update. I straightened. He's awake. Checked out of the hotel 15 minutes ago. We got confirmation from local PD monitoring the area. I pictured David packing the last of the designer clothes he bought with my money, shoving Rachel's belongings into her bag, still thinking he controlled the board. Still thinking I was gone, lost, reduced to a bureaucratic problem he'd used to justify every forged signature. Any activity on the accounts, I asked. Miller nodded. 3 attempts around 5 a.m. All denied. He tried to access your trust portals through remote login. He used the credentials he stole from your office desk. I swallowed hard. That desk. The drawer where I'd kept personal ledgers, handwritten notes, passwords. The place he always insisted on helping me organize. Miller's jaw clenched. He's panicking now. And panicked people make mistakes. The irony was sharp, almost bitter. David had spent months crafting a perfect illusion, only to unravel in hours. "What about Rachel?" I asked. "Still with him," Miller said. "We tracked her phone ping in the same corridor. She appears unaware she'll be arrested upon arrival." A strange quiet moved through me. I didn't want to hate her, but hate wasn't a choice. It was a consequence. "ETA," I pressed. "Flight lands at 3:25 p.m., with traffic likely before 5. I nodded, letting the numbers anchor me. The timeline tightened around my ribs, a tension that made my breaths deeper, steadier. Mr. Reynolds stepped into the living room, then holding a slim manila folder. His suit was immaculate, despite the sleepless night. His expression carried neither comfort nor pity, only resolve. "Elizabeth," he said, "there's something you need to see." He handed me a sheet from the folder, a printed screenshot of an outgoing message David had drafted earlier that morning. The subject line hit me first. "Missing person report. Urgent assistance needed." My hands curled around the paper. He had been ready to erase me officially. Erase me from every database. Erase me from every record that proved I existed. Replace my voice with his. Reynolds's voice cut through the tightening in my chest. He would have gained temporary conservatorship. Full access. If he filed this while you were unable to contact authorities, he could have argued imminent risk. And after that, I asked, though I knew the answer, he would have liquidated everything under emergency authority. My hands went numb around the paper. He expected the world to believe you vanished on a trip. He expected time to break your identity. He expected fear to keep you silent. Reynolds looked at me closely. He did not expect you to come home. I let out a breath, slow, controlled. Then let's ruin his expectations. The preparations continued without pause. Technicians checked the hidden cameras embedded in the molding, the recording devices disguised in the art frames, the microphones tucked near the vent grates. Every corner of the foyer and living room was covered. No angle unaccounted for, no shadow unmonitored. The house felt alive, electric, with the tension of people who knew the walls were about to witness the truth. Around noon, the final pieces were set. All I had to do was wait. Waiting turned out to be its own kind of violence. Time stretched, pulled thin like a wire vibrating under strain. I wandered the house in slow circles, touching the back of the sofa, the cold edge of the dining table, the bookshelf David had helped me assemble 2 years ago. Every surface felt different now, as though a film had been peeled away, and what remained was the raw, stripped-down reality of a life I had mistaken for something safe. I paused at the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the one who boarded the flight to California with a heart full of trust. Her shoulders were squared. Her eyes held something unforgiving. I didn't look like prey anymore. I took a slow breath and turned away. At 3:30, the first alert came from the surveillance team. His plane had landed. At 3:50, he picked up luggage. At 4:05, he and Rachel exited JFK. At 4:14, the taxi license plate was captured. At 4:58, the license plate passed the traffic checkpoint 5 blocks from the townhouse. The house shifted. The air thickened. The silence sharpened. Agent Miller appeared at the threshold of the living room. "He's close," he said quietly. "Positions." One by one, the agents disappeared into the study, closing the doors until only a sliver of golden light glowed from beneath. Their shadows stilled behind it, forming a silent line of defense, waiting for the moment to break. Mr. Reynolds paused beside me. When he enters, don't confront him. Let him talk. Let him trap himself. Your silence will do more damage than fury. I nodded. I understand. But understanding didn't prepare me for the tremor that went through the floor when a car door slammed outside. A second slam, a suitcase wheel scraping asphalt. Footsteps on stone. David's footsteps. The sound I once associated with home now felt like the approach of something cold and violent. I positioned myself in the armchair, facing the entryway, the room lit only by the muted afternoon sun washing through the tall windows. My fingers wrapped around the porcelain of a fresh cup of tea, steady poised. The world held its breath. A key turned in the lock. Metal slid against metal. The door creaked open. A gust of outside air pushed inward. Then his silhouette filled the doorway. His posture was tense, jaw-tight hair disheveled from what must have been a frantic trip back. He dragged the suitcase in with a jerky motion. His eyes darted around the dim interior. Elizabeth. There was no affection in the way he said my name, only confusion thickened with frustration. He stepped inside another few feet. Why are the lights off? His voice was sharp, irritated. Liz. He reached for the switch near the door, fingers flicked. The chandelier exploded in full brilliance. White light spilling across the living room, and he froze. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I simply lifted my gaze to his, letting the silence wrap around him like a noose. His face drained of color, all the blood crashing downward. The suitcase slipped from his hand. It hit the floor with a hard, echoing thud. No, he breathed. No, this isn't. He stumbled backward a step, as if the room itself had betrayed him. I set my cup down quietly, the porcelain tapping once against the table. The sound made him flinch. His mouth opened, but whatever lie he was reaching for died in his throat. He stared at me as though I were a ghost, crawling out of the grave he dug. The panic was immediate and raw, cracking through the facade he had curated with such precision. Elizabeth! He swallowed hard. You weren't supposed to. I didn't speak. Not yet. My silence was deliberate, surgical, and it terrified him. He stepped forward again, hands slightly raised, not in surrender, but in desperation. Let me explain, he said quickly. It's not what you think. I was trying to help. There was a misunderstanding. The lies came tumbling out, frantic, graceless. Nothing like the careful manipulation he once wielded. What happened in California, what happened at the airport, it wasn't what it looked like. You don't understand. I had to take your things because the sentence collapsed under its own stupidity. He was unraveling. Good. I watched him quietly, my heartbeat slow, steady, a stark contrast to his frantic breathing. My stillness seemed to provoke something inside him, a crack widening into something sharper. His voice dropped. Anger seeped through the panic. You weren't supposed to be here, he said, the truth slipping fast. You were supposed to stay there long enough. Long enough for the paperwork. My eyes narrowed, not in theatrics, but in recognition. There it was, the confession beginning to take shape. He ran a hand through his hair, pulling at the strands. This was all supposed to be clean, he muttered. You weren't supposed to make this complicated. He kept talking, each sentence damning himself further. And behind the study door, I knew microphones captured every syllable, every admission, every intention. I didn't need to goad him, didn't need to accuse him. His fear was doing all the work. He stepped closer, eyes darkening. If you had just stayed put, just once in your life, listened, none of this would have happened. My voice finally cut through the air, slow, cold, steady. I did listen, I said, just not to you. The room stilled, my words hung in the air like a blade. And somewhere in that pause, David realized something he hadn't expected. The woman he tried to erase was done being erased. He opened his mouth whether to threaten or plead. I would never find out, because at that precise second, a soft click came from behind him. The study door unlatched. The trap had finished closing. The sound of the study door unlocking sliced through the air like a clean blade. David stiffened. His breath hitched, barely audible, but I heard it. I felt it. For a single suspended heartbeat, the world narrowed into that thin electric silence that comes just before destruction. Then the door opened, not wide, just enough. A sliver of golden light spilled across the foyer floor, breaking against the marble like a thin, merciless sunrise. In its glow stood three silhouettes, Mr. Reynolds, Agent Miller, and another federal agent shifting into formation. David turned his head toward them with a jerky, terrified motion. "What?" his voice cracked. "What is this? What are you doing in my house?" My house? The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. But I remained seated, watching him with a quietness sharper than any blade. My pulse didn't rush, my hands didn't shake. A strange calm settled into my bones, a cold, crystalline certainty that this was the moment everything had been leading toward. Agent Miller stepped forward, every movement deliberate, controlled, lethal in its precision. "David Hale," he said, his tone neutral but ironclad. "You are under investigation for attempted fraud, financial coercion, identity theft, and premeditated abandonment with malicious intent." David's lips parted. No words came out. The floor seemed to tilt under him. "You're lying," he whispered. "You have no proof. She can't prove anything. She was gone." Reynolds's voice slid into the room like a knife dipped in ice. "We don't need her to prove anything." He lifted a small black device, no bigger than a matchbox. "Because you did it yourself." David's eyes widened. What Miller tapped the molding above the entryway. "Camera," he said. He pointed to another corner. Camera, then another, and microphone, and another, and another. David's gaze darted wildly around the ceiling, finally seeing what had been invisible to him. Tiny lenses hidden in the ornate lines of the molding matte black microphones tucked behind the decorative sconces. Reynolds spoke again. "Every word you said since you walked through that door has been recorded." David's knees wobbled. He reached instinctively for the wall, but the wall didn't care enough to hold him. "You people set me up," he spat, voice rising. "You trapped me in my own home." "No," the word left me quietly with the weight of truth behind it. "You trapped yourself." He spun toward me, eyes bloodshot with panic and betrayal, an irony so grotesque it almost made the room spin. "You think you're better than me?" he snarled. "You think you can just come back and ruin everything?" "You were supposed to stay gone, Elizabeth. That was the plan. The plan. Exactly the phrase they needed on record. Miller gave a subtle nod toward the second agent. It was almost time, but David wasn't finished. Fear had cracked him open, and now everything poured out. Ugly, frantic, unfiltered. "You were never supposed to come back," he said, voice shaking. "I made it perfect. Everything was lined up. The accounts, the documents. Rachel understood the plan. And you—" He jabbed a trembling finger toward me. "You were supposed to disappear long enough for everything to clear." Disappear. Like an inconvenience. Like an obstacle. Like trash. The anger hit me, not the wild, uncontrollable kind, but something slow-burning and razor-sharp. Miller Reynolds said quietly, "That's more than enough." The agent stepped forward, drawing closer, hand reaching for his cuffs. David saw the motion, and something in him snapped. "No," he shouted, stumbling backward. "You can't arrest me. You can't. This is my house. This is my life." His voice shredded at the edges. "You can't do this to me." Then in a movement that wasn't entirely rational, David lunged, not at Miller, not at Reynolds, at me. Maybe he thought grabbing me would give him leverage. Maybe he thought harming me would ruin the case. Maybe he was just desperate enough to lose the last scrap of judgment he had left. What he didn't expect was how little I moved. I didn't flinch. I didn't retreat. I simply shifted my weight an inch, angled my body away. His hand missed my arm by a breath. And in the same instant, Agent Miller grabbed him from behind, one arm hooking around David's shoulders, the other pinning his wrists. The second agent moved in, taking advantage of the split-second opening to snap the cuffs around his wrists. Metal clamped shut, a violent final sound. David jerked once, twice. Futile struggles that only made the cuffs tighten. He dropped to his knees, the force of his collapse, dragging the agents forward a fraction of an inch. "No, no, please, Elizabeth." He tried to twist toward me, face streaked with sweat. "Tell them to stop. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them—" His voice cracked. "Please." It was the first time I had heard him say that word without manipulation twisting inside it. I looked down at him not as a wife, not as a victim, but as a woman who had crawled out of a grave he dug. "This," I said softly, "is the one thing you planned that actually worked." A strangled sound tore from his throat. Anger or despair, I couldn't tell. But the moment wasn't over. Not yet, because the front door, still half opened from when David had entered, shifted again. The chaotic wail of a woman echoed from outside. "David, David, what's happening? Why are there police? Rachel!" Two uniformed officers appeared on the walkway behind her. They had stopped her near the gate, but her panic made her fight their grip. "Let me go! You said this was safe!" she shouted at the officers. "He told me. He promised me everything was taken care of. I didn't know she wasn't supposed to come back." Every word carried through the open door drifted into the foyer, straight into the microphones. David flinched as though the sound burned him. "No, Rachel, stop!" But she didn't stop, her hysteria crescendoed voice cracking into raw confession. "He said she wouldn't be a problem. He said she'd be stranded, and enough." One of the officers said sharply, hauling her back. But the damage was done. Her voice had been recorded too. Her panic had underlined the truth. David sagged forward on his knees, head hanging so low, his hair brushed the floor. Reynolds stepped beside me, his voice low. "The case is sealed. Between his statements and hers, this is over." But watching David crumble, didn't bring relief. Not yet. Relief requires closure. And I was still standing in the ruins of the life he tried to reshape without me. The agents lifted him to his feet. He swayed weak and defeated the confident facade stripped away entirely. As they began escorting him toward the door, he twisted his head back. A final desperate glance. There was no anger left there, no pride, just disbelief, astonishment that I hadn't broken the way he predicted, the way he relied on. Before they pushed him outside, Reynolds spoke one last time. "David Hale," he said, voice cool and absolute. "Everything you built on deception ends now." The door shut behind them, and the house fell into stillness. Not peace, peace is soft, forgiving. This was a different silence, a silence carved from justice, a silence that hummed at the edges, deep and vengeful, like the inhale before the dawn breaks. I stood alone in the center of the foyer, the air still vibrating with echoes of the confrontation. The marble, once cold, now felt warmer beneath my feet, like the house itself had finally exhaled. I wasn't free yet, but I was no longer hunted, no longer erased. In the quiet, I felt the faintest stirrings of something unfamiliar. Not triumph, not victory, but the first fragile thread of reclaiming myself. The house didn't return to silence all at once. It faded slowly like smoke thinning in a cold room. The agent's footsteps receded, the clink of metal cuffs dimmed, and the last distant echo of the patrol car's door slamming shut dissolved into the early evening air. I stood alone at the center of the foyer, the marble beneath me still vibrating with the aftershock of everything that had happened within its walls. The chandelier lights glowed overhead, too golden, too gentle, casting warmth onto a moment that felt anything but. The house wasn't the same, neither was I. Mr. Reynolds stepped out of the study, closing the door behind him with a soft click. In his hand was a leather folder neatly sealed. When he approached me, he didn't immediately speak. He looked at me the way someone looks at a person standing at the edge of a canyon. Someone who has made it across but still feels the wind pulling at their back. "It's over," he said quietly. I didn't answer right away. Over. The word felt too final, too neat. For what remained inside me this strange mixture of emptiness and weight, like standing in the hollowed-out rib cage of a collapsed building. "Is it?" I asked. Reynolds seemed to consider this. "For him, yes. For you," he hesitated, "it can be." I let out a slow breath, not a trembling one, not the kind that held back tears, but a breath that came from deep inside a space that was no longer fractured. "What happens next?" I asked. He opened the folder, sliding a stack of documents onto the side table. Legal aftermath, asset restoration, a formal statement if you choose to give one. Media attention will die fast. The evidence is airtight. There won't be a public trial, just a sentencing hearing. He'll get decades. And Rachel, her name tasted bitter. "She'll serve time," Reynolds said. "Not as long, but enough." Justice, cold, heavy, exacting. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like consequence. Reynolds added, "Your life is yours again, Elizabeth. Mine." The word carried a strange unfamiliarity. My life had been a polished set piece. David curated a place where I played the role he needed, where my trust was a currency, where every soft edge of me had been used against myself without my knowing. I walked into the living room, the faint smell of my chamomile tea still lingering in the air. The cup sat where I had placed it before the confrontation, its steam long gone, its surface still. I touched the rim, still warm, still mine. When I turned back, the agents were gathering equipment, quietly removing the devices from the walls with meticulous care. One of them passed me, paused, and said softly, "You were brave." I didn't feel brave. I felt awake. The house dimmed as the sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the floor, reaching toward the place where David had been forced to his knees. That spot looked different now, like some invisible stain had seeped into the stone. I stepped closer to it, not to relive the moment, but to reclaim it. Reynolds joined me again once the agents finished and left through the back. "If you need anything legal, emotional support, relocation, protective services, I'm staying," I interrupted. He nodded. He didn't question it. He knew this wasn't stubbornness, it was truth. When he finally left through the front door and the deadbolt locked behind him, the quiet that settled over the townhouse was complete. Not empty, just clean, unburdened by someone else's lies. I walked upstairs. My steps echoed. The master bedroom was exactly as I'd left it. The morning of the trip bed, perfectly made curtains. Half drawn, the faint scent of the perfume I used on the neckline of my coat, lingering in the air. Yet everything felt wrong, like stepping into a photograph of a life that had belonged to someone else. The bedspread felt untouched by grief. The walls felt blind to everything that had happened. This room was a lie, a stage set for a woman who didn't exist anymore. I stepped inside slowly, like entering a room filled with ghosts. His scent was still on the pillows. His shirt still hung in the closet, crisp and folded. I opened the closet door. The air inside was stale. One by one, I slid his shirts off their hangers. Not angrily, not as revenge, just as a quiet acknowledgement that every thread, every collar, every neatly ironed sleeve belonged to a version of my life that had died the moment he left me at the airport. I placed them in a donation bin, closed the lid, turned away. In the bathroom mirror, I caught my reflection. Pale, tired, yet illuminated by something too sharp to be called survival. I didn't see a victim. I didn't see the woman who boarded the plane with trust still blooming in her chest. What I saw was someone carved, chiseled by betrayal, reshaped by fire, someone dangerous in her clarity, unrecognizable even to herself. I left the bedroom, closed the door behind me. I never stepped inside it again. The next weeks unfolded with a rhythm that felt like stitching a slow, methodical mending of a life ripped open. Court hearings, financial disclosures, depositions, statements, freezing of David's accounts, seizures of his assets, restructuring of mine. Everything he stole returned to me piece by piece, like shards of a shattered mirror being pressed back into shape. But none of it felt like restoration. It felt like rebuilding from the bones up. He tried to reach out from jail. Letters, requests, emotional pleas coded in manipulation. I didn't read them. Reynolds burned each one without showing me the contents. I never asked what they said. Rachel pled guilty in exchange for leniency. Her face appeared once on a news broadcast, pale blotchy, shaking the mascara smeared beneath her eyes like oil stains. She blamed him, blamed desperation, blamed her own stupidity. But I didn't care. Not about her, not about her excuses. She wasn't the ghost that haunted me in the quiet moments. Only he was, David, the man who rehearsed how to ruin me, the man who saw my trust as a flaw to exploit, the man who believed my kindness was an invitation to kill it. He was sentenced to 27 years, no parole. When the judge read the verdict, he looked at me once one last glance from a life already fading. I stared back with a calm so precise it felt like a blade. No anger, no forgiveness, just recognition. The final severing of a bond that never existed in the first place. 6 months later, I sold the townhouse. I didn't do it because of the memories. It wasn't the betrayal that haunted the walls. It was the knowledge that this house had witnessed my ignorance, my blindness, my unquestioning trust. I didn't want to live inside the echo of someone else's lies. I bought a penthouse overlooking the harbor, clean lines, wide windows, no ghosts. A home I chose. A home untouched by deceit. The foundation I built grew quickly. Women came with stories almost too similar, almost too familiar. Financial abuse, coerced signatures, invisible violence behind closed doors. I listened, I helped, I reclaimed pieces of myself in every case we won. But the day I truly felt the shift, the moment the world tilted in the right direction, was quieter. It was a morning like any other, the air still cool, the sky pale with early light. I packed a small suitcase, not heavy, not symbolic, just enough for a short trip. A trip I had chosen. No husband, no itinerary planned by someone else, no illusions. When I arrived at the airport, I moved with certainty, not looking over my shoulder, not clutching my belongings to my chest. I wasn't afraid of losing anything, because everything of value was already inside me. At the departure board, my eyes skimmed city names, until one caught my attention, a place I had always wanted to see, but had never dared choose on my own. A place that felt like a beginning. I booked the ticket, paid with my own card, held my own passport, walked to my gate alone. When I sat by the wide glass window overlooking the runway, sunlight spilled across my hands, warm and golden. I looked at the plane waiting outside, sleek silver humming with promise. My reflection appeared faintly in the glass, worn but awake, hardened but whole, alive, entirely my own. I closed my eyes, breathing in the moment, not as a survivor, not as a victim, but as a woman who had buried her past and built her future with her own hands. A woman no one could erase again. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. I stood, lifted my suitcase, walked forward, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the unmistakable sensation of stepping into my own life.